The morning light filtered through the massive windows of the Galactic Military Academy as students from dozens of different worlds gathered in the main lecture hall. The academy floated in space near the edge of known territory, a gleaming station that housed the brightest military minds from across the galaxy. Today was special because Commander Zixara would be teaching about something that had puzzled military leaders for months. Commander Zixara walked into the classroom with her usual grace. She was an Altarian elf, tall and elegant, with long silver hair that seemed to glow in the artificial light. Her pointed ears twitched slightly as she heard the students settling into their seats. Her blue eyes, which had seen over 300 years of life, scanned the room filled with different species from across the galaxy. The students represented the best and brightest from their respective worlds. Calais sat in the front row, her crystalline Velthari body sparkling like a living diamond. Her people were known for their logical thinking and perfect memory. Next to her sat Nixthara, a graceful Merdai whose blue-green hair flowed like water and whose gills fluttered gently in the recycled air. The Merdai were famous for their wisdom and deep-thinking abilities. Behind them, Tervok clicked his mandibles softly as he organized his notes with precise movements. The Krethak were insect-like beings known for their incredible tactical abilities and compound eyes that could see in multiple spectrums. Several other species filled the remaining seats, each bringing their own unique abilities and perspectives to the academy. Commander Zixara placed her hands on the podium and looked out at her students. These were not ordinary military cadets, but advanced students who would soon become leaders in their respective fleets. They had studied together for 2 years and had developed a comfortable rhythm of learning and debate. Today we will discuss something that has been troubling military commanders across the galaxy, she began, her melodic voice carrying easily through the room. As you all know, the Galactic Council recently made an unusual decision regarding one particular species and their involvement in military operations. The students leaned forward with interest. They had heard rumors about new policies, but nothing official had been announced to the student body. The Terran species, commonly known as humans, has been officially banned from participating in joint military exercises and combat operations, she continued. This decision came after what the Council termed multiple concerning incidents that raised questions about their suitability for standard military procedures. A wave of amused sounds filled the classroom. Calais' crystalline form brightened, which was how her species showed amusement. "Professor, this hardly seems surprising," she said in her clear bell-like voice. "The humans are the newest species to achieve space travel. They barely discovered faster-than-light technology 50 years ago. Surely they simply lack the experience for serious military work." Nixthara nodded, her flowing hair moving like seaweed in an ocean current. "I have studied their biology extensively," she added. "They have no natural armor plating like the Velthari. They cannot breathe underwater like my people. They have no compound eyes for enhanced vision like the Krethak. They live for less than 100 years, which gives them barely enough time to gain any real experience. The ban seems more like a kindness to protect them from situations beyond their capabilities." Other students murmured agreement. It seemed obvious to everyone that humans were simply not equipped for the demands of galactic warfare. Their short lives, fragile bodies, and primitive technology made them seem like children playing at war compared to species that had been fighting across the stars for thousands of years. Tervok raised one of his 4 arms to speak. "My analysis of human military history shows they fight among themselves constantly," he said in his precise, clicking speech. "They have wars over resources, territory, and ideas. This suggests poor coordination abilities and lack of logical thinking. Perhaps the ban prevents them from bringing their chaotic nature to organized military operations." Commander Zixara listened to her students' comments with a slight smile. She had expected these reactions because she had shared similar thoughts when she first heard about the human ban. After 3 centuries of life and 2 centuries of military service, she thought she understood what made different species effective in combat. "Your observations align perfectly with the initial assessments made by xenobiologists and military analysts," she said. "The official reports describe humans as physically weak, short-lived, and lacking the specialized abilities that make other species valuable in combat situations. However, I want you to examine the actual incidents that led to this decision." She moved to the holographic display system at the front of the classroom. With a gesture, she activated the projector, and suddenly, the air filled with floating documents and video files. The classification marks on the files showed they were highly restricted material that students would normally never be allowed to see. The Galactic Council has granted special permission for this class to review classified combat recordings involving human personnel, she explained. These files document the incidents that led to the human ban. I want you to study them carefully, and then provide your analysis of whether the Council made the correct decision. The students sat up straighter, excited by the prospect of seeing real combat footage. They expected to see examples of human incompetence, tactical failures, or perhaps dangerous mistakes that put other species at risk. It would be educational, to understand what not to do in military situations. Kale's crystalline form pulsed with anticipation. Will we see recordings of their primitive weapons failing against modern shields? She asked. Or perhaps examples of their short attention spans causing mission failures? Added Nix Thera. Commander Zixara touched the display controls, and the first file appeared in the air before them. The label read, Operation Crimson Dawn, Keth Mori hostage situation. We will start with this incident, she said. It involved a joint rescue mission where human soldiers worked alongside some of our finest military personnel. I want you to watch carefully and note anything unusual about their behavior or tactics. The room darkened as the holographic recording began to play. The students settled back in their seats, notebooks ready, expecting to see a textbook example of why inexperienced species should not be involved in serious military operations. They had no idea that what they were about to witness would challenge everything they thought they knew about warfare, tactics, and the nature of the species they had dismissed as primitive and weak. The recording started with a tactical overview of the situation, showing the layout of Keth Mori Station and the positions of both the hostages and their captors. It looked like a standard rescue scenario, the type that military academies used for training exercises. The students watched, with professional interest, ready to critique the inevitable human mistakes. The holographic display showed the interior of Keth Mori Station in perfect detail. The tactical overlay revealed 12 civilian hostages trapped in the station's main cargo bay, surrounded by heavily armed separatist militants who had taken control of that section. The rescue team consisted of 8 soldiers, 4 Altarian special forces known for their precision and grace, 2 Velthari shock troops with their nearly indestructible crystalline bodies, and 2 human marines. Commander, Zixara pointed to the display as the recording began. This mission took place 6 months ago, she explained. The separatists had sophisticated weapons and defensive positions. Standard protocol called for a careful, coordinated assault to minimize casualties among both the rescue team and the hostages. The students watched as the non-human forces moved into position with textbook precision. The Altarian soldiers glided through the corridors like dancers, their movements smooth and calculated. The Velthari troops advanced with methodical determination, their crystal-hard skin providing natural armor against enemy fire. Everything proceeded according to established military doctrine. Then the camera focused on the 2 human soldiers, Corporal Lisa Martinez and Private Amy Johnson. Both looked remarkably ordinary compared to their alien teammates. They wore standard body armor that seemed bulky and primitive next to the elegant equipment used by other species. Their weapons appeared crude and simple. Notice how the humans lag behind the main assault team, Kale observed, her crystalline form dimming with what appeared to be disappointment. They seemed slower and less coordinated than the others. The recording showed the rescue team reaching the outer perimeter of the separatist-controlled area. The plan called for a simultaneous breach from 3 different entry points, with each pair of soldiers responsible for a specific section. The Altarians would enter from the main corridor, the Velthari would come through the maintenance tunnels, and the humans were assigned to provide support from the rear position. Everything went wrong within the first 30 seconds. The separatists had prepared for a standard assault and immediately opened fire with concentrated energy weapons from concealed positions. The carefully planned approach collapsed as the rescue team found themselves pinned down by accurate fire from multiple directions. The Altarian soldiers took cover behind structural supports, their graceful advance halted. The Velthari troops, despite their natural armor, were forced to retreat from positions where the energy weapons could potentially crack their crystalline bodies. "This is a disaster," Nixithara whispered, her gills fluttering with stress. The Separatists clearly anticipated their approach. But then something unexpected happened. The two human soldiers, instead of following their orders to maintain the rear position, broke formation completely. "What are they doing?" Tervok clicked in confusion as he watched Corporal Martinez sprint directly toward the heaviest concentration of enemy fire. Private Johnson was moving in the opposite direction, but her path made no tactical sense either. She seemed to be heading for a maintenance shaft that was clearly too small for any humanoid species to navigate. The students watched in bewilderment as she began forcing herself into the narrow opening. "They are abandoning their assigned positions," Calais said, her voice showing disapproval. "This violates basic military coordination principles." Commander Zixara said nothing but continued watching the display with careful attention. Corporal Martinez was now moving through the corridor in a pattern that defied every principle of combat movement the students had learned. Instead of seeking cover, she seemed to be deliberately exposing herself to enemy fire. She rolled across open spaces, dove through gaps in the barricades, and at one point actually hung upside down from damaged ceiling supports while firing her weapon. "She is going to get herself killed," Nixthara said with genuine concern. But Martinez was not getting killed. Every movement that looked suicidal was actually drawing enemy fire away from the hostages and creating opportunities for her teammates to advance. When she exposed herself in one area, the Separatists naturally focused their weapons on her, leaving other positions temporarily undefended. Meanwhile, Private Johnson had somehow squeezed herself through the maintenance shaft that the mission planners had dismissed as impassable. The students watched in amazement as she emerged behind the enemy positions, appearing in places where the Separatists had not expected any threat. "How did she fit through that opening?" Kalai asked, her crystalline form flickering with confusion. The shaft diameter was clearly too small for humanoid passage. What happened next made several students gasp. Johnson was not just behind enemy lines. She was moving through the Separatist positions like smoke. She appeared from air vents, crawled through spaces between wall panels, and at one point seemed to materialize from inside a piece of damaged equipment. The Separatists, who had been confident in their defensive positions, suddenly found themselves under attack from directions they had not even considered possible. Their organized resistance began to crumble as they tried to track enemies who seemed to operate outside normal physical limitations. Corporal Martinez continued her impossible advance, using broken pipes as handholds, debris as shields, and at one point actually using a piece of falling ceiling as a stepping stone to reach an elevated position. Her movements looked chaotic and random, but the result was devastating to enemy morale. "They fight like they do not care about their own safety," Tervok observed, his compound eyes tracking the humans' movements with increasing alarm. Within 12 minutes of the initial breach, both human soldiers had converged on the hostage location. They moved so quickly and unpredictably that the Separatists could not coordinate an effective response. The enemy forces, who had been prepared for a conventional assault, found themselves overwhelmed by tactics that made no logical sense. The rescue was completed with surgical precision. All 12 hostages were secured without injury. Every Separatist was either captured or neutralized. The mission that had seemed impossible just minutes earlier was suddenly over. The other members of the rescue team, the highly trained Altarian and Velthari soldiers, stood in the aftermath looking confused and slightly shaken. They had been reduced to providing covering fire while the two humans had essentially completed the entire mission alone. The recording ended, and the classroom fell into complete silence. Commander Zixara finally spoke. The mission was classified as a complete success, she said quietly. However, both human soldiers received formal reprimands for reckless endangerment, failure to follow established protocols, and actions likely to cause psychological trauma to Allied forces. Calais' crystalline form had stopped sparkling entirely. "But they succeeded," she said in a confused voice. "They saved all the hostages." "Yes," Zixara replied. "They did. But their methods were deemed too dangerous and unpredictable for future operations." Nixthara raised her hand slowly. "Professor, how did they know those tactics would work?" Did they have special intelligence about the enemy positions? According to the mission reports, the humans had access to exactly the same information as every other member of the team, Zixara answered. They simply chose to ignore conventional tactical doctrine entirely. Tervok's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep thought among his species. They appeared to be improvising their entire approach in real time, he said. That should have resulted in complete failure. Perhaps it was luck, Calais suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Commander, Zixara looked at her students, all of whom seemed uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Let us examine the next incident before drawing any conclusions, she said, moving to load another file. This one is significantly more complex. The students shifted in their seats, no longer confident in their earlier assessments. What they had just seen challenged everything they thought they understood about military tactics and the capabilities of the human species. The second holographic file materialized in the air above the students, labeled Operation Steel Resolve, Velthari Colony Defense. Commander Zixara gestured toward the display as the tactical overview began to load. This incident occurred 3 months after the hostage rescue, she explained. A Velthari mining colony on the Outer Rim came under attack by unknown raiders using advanced weapons and superior numbers. The defense force was assembled quickly from available personnel in the sector. The display showed the colony layout, a collection of mining facilities and residential domes clustered around a central processing plant. The defending force included 20 Velthari soldiers whose crystalline bodies could withstand significant damage, 15 Altarian rangers known for their strategic thinking, 10 Krethak tactical specialists with their superior sensory abilities, and 5 human personnel. Calais leaned forward with particular interest, since this involved her own species. Velthari colonies are heavily fortified, she said. Our natural defenses combined with proper tactical positions should make any assault extremely costly for attackers. The recording began with the initial attack. The raiding force appeared to be using military-grade equipment and professional tactics. Their ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, immediately establishing orbital superiority and beginning a systematic bombardment of the colony's outer defenses. The raiders clearly had detailed intelligence about the colony's defensive capabilities, Commander Zixara noted. Their attack pattern suggests extensive planning and resources. The students watched as the defending forces took up their assigned positions around the colony's perimeter. The Velthari soldiers positioned themselves at strategic choke points where their natural armor would be most effective. The Altarian rangers spread out to provide covering fire and coordinate the defense. The Krethak specialists used their enhanced vision to track enemy movements and call out targeting information. The human soldiers, Sergeant Katie Brooks and her 4-person team, were assigned to defend the eastern approach, a relatively quiet sector that tactical analysis suggested would see minimal action. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to standard defensive doctrine. The raiders probed the colony's defenses with small groups while their main force prepared for a coordinated assault. The defenders held their positions and repelled each probe with minimal casualties. Then the raiders launched their main attack. 300 heavily armed soldiers descended from their ships in assault craft, supported by armored vehicles and aerial bombardment. They struck simultaneously at multiple points around the colony's perimeter, using overwhelming force to break through the defensive lines. The Velthari soldiers fought with determined courage, their crystalline bodies deflecting energy weapons, while they returned fire with their own advanced weapons. The Altarian Rangers coordinated the defense with tactical precision, adjusting their positions to counter each enemy thrust. The Krethak specialists provided crucial intelligence about enemy movements and weaknesses. Despite their efforts, the defenders were being overwhelmed. The raiders had too many soldiers, too much firepower, and too much coordination. The defensive perimeter began to collapse in several places as the enemy pushed forward relentlessly. Then something happened that made every student in the classroom freeze in shock. The 5 human soldiers abandoned their defensive positions and charged directly into the attacking force. "What are they doing?" Nixithera gasped, her aquatic features pale with horror. "That is suicide!" Sergeant Brooks and her team were running straight toward the heaviest concentration of enemy fire, making no attempt to seek cover or coordinate with the other defenders. They were outnumbered 60-1 and had no supporting weapons or armor advantages. But they were also screaming. The humans were actually vocalizing loudly while they attacked, producing sounds that had no tactical purpose and should have made stealth impossible. The noise they made was not just loud, but somehow disturbing, a combination of shouting and something that sounded almost like the hunting calls of predatory animals. "This violates every principle of military engagement," Tervok said, his compound, eyes wide with disbelief. "They are alerting every enemy in the area to their exact position." The effect on the raiders was immediate and completely unexpected. Their organized assault faltered as soldiers turned to stare at the 5 humans charging toward them while making impossible amounts of noise. The raiders had been prepared for a defensive battle, not for enemies who seemed to have abandoned all sense of self-preservation. Private Megan Foster reached a damaged defense tower that was actively collapsing from enemy bombardment. Instead of avoiding the obvious danger, she began climbing the tower while it fell apart around her, using the falling debris as cover while she fired down at the enemy formations. Corporal Linda Hayes spotted a mining vehicle that had been damaged in the initial bombardment and was now burning fiercely. Rather than staying away from the obvious fire hazard, she jumped into the vehicle and drove it directly into the enemy formation while it was still on fire. "They fight like they are already dead," Calais whispered, her crystalline form now pulsing, with an emotion none of the students had seen before. Private Janet Wood found herself facing a group of 12 raiders who had her completely surrounded. Instead of surrendering or calling for help, she attacked all of them simultaneously, somehow moving between their positions so quickly that they could not coordinate their fire without risking shooting each other. The raiders, who had been conducting a professional military operation just minutes before, began to retreat in confusion. They could not predict what the humans would do next, because the humans seemed to operate outside any recognizable tactical framework. Sergeant Brooks appeared on top of an enemy armored vehicle, having somehow climbed onto it during the battle. She was attacking the vehicle's systems with what appeared to be a mining tool she had picked up somewhere along the way. The retreat became a rout. The raiders, faced with enemies who seemed to follow no logical patterns and who appeared unafraid of death itself, abandoned their assault and fled back to their ships. The colony was saved. The cost to the defenders was remarkably light. Several wounded, but no fatalities. The human team had somehow survived their impossible charge without losing a single member. The recording ended in stunned silence. Commander Zixara looked at her students, all of whom appeared shaken by what they had witnessed. The colony's defensive commander submitted a report praising the human soldiers for their bravery and effectiveness, she said quietly. However, he also recommended that they never be assigned to defensive operations again. "Why?" Calais asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. "Because their tactics were described as extremely dangerous and unpredictable, and psychologically disturbing to Allied forces," Zixara replied. Several of the other defenders required counseling after witnessing the human assault. Nix Thara raised her hand slowly. "Professor, the raiders were professional soldiers with superior numbers and equipment. How did 5 humans cause them to retreat?" According to the post-battle analysis, the raiders became convinced they were facing an enemy that did not follow normal patterns of behavior, Zixara explained. They could not develop effective countermeasures against tactics that seemed to ignore basic survival instincts. Tervok's mandibles clicked rapidly. "But surely this was another anomaly," he said. "2 unusual incidents do not establish a pattern." Commander Zixara moved to load the 3rd file. "Let us examine one more recording before we discuss patterns," she said. "This next incident is considered the most disturbing of all." The students sat back in their chairs, no longer confident in their understanding of human capabilities. What they had seen challenged not just their assumptions about human weakness, but their understanding of how rational beings should behave in combat situations. The 3rd recording appeared in the holographic display with a classification level that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. The file was labeled Operation Dark Current, Deep Space Boarding Action, and carried security, markings that indicated it had been restricted to only the highest levels of military command. "This incident occurred just 6 weeks ago," Commander Zixara said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Pirates had captured a civilian transport vessel carrying over 200 passengers. The ship was in deep space, far from any patrol routes, and the pirates were threatening to execute hostages if any rescue attempt was detected. The tactical display showed the captured transport ship, a large civilian vessel now controlled by the pirate crew. The rescue operation required boarding the enemy ship without alerting the pirates to the assault, securing the hostages, and neutralizing the threat before any civilians could be harmed. This type of mission represents one of the most difficult challenges in military operations, Zixara explained. The boarding team must overcome superior defensive positions, unknown ship layouts, and the constant threat that any mistake will result in mass casualties among innocent civilians. The joint rescue team included 12 of the most elite soldiers from across the galaxy. There were 4 Altarian Shadow Warriors, specialists in stealth operations who could move like ghosts through enemy territory, 3 Velthari assault specialists, whose crystalline bodies could withstand the heavy weapons typically found on pirate vessels, 2 Krethak infiltration experts whose compound eyes could see through most concealment systems and whose small size allowed them access to restricted spaces, 3 human Navy personnel, Chief Petty Officer Rebecca Stone, Petty Officer Second Class Tracy Adams, and Seaman Sandra Miller. Calais studied the mission parameters with professional interest. The pirate vessel appears to be heavily modified. With additional armor and weapons, she observed, standard boarding procedures would take hours to execute safely. The time factor was critical, Zixara agreed. Intelligence indicated that the pirates were becoming increasingly unstable and might begin executing hostages at any moment. The recording began with the approach phase. The rescue team's ship moved silently through space, using advanced stealth technology to avoid detection. The elite alien soldiers prepared their specialized equipment, molecular cutting tools, personal shield generators, and sensors that could map the interior of the enemy vessel. Everything proceeded according to the mission plan until the team made contact with the pirate ship's hull. The alien soldiers began their careful infiltration, cutting precisely measured entry points and using their sophisticated sensors to navigate the ship's interior. Their movements were coordinated and professional, following procedures that had been developed over centuries of experience. The 3 human soldiers took a completely different approach. Instead of using the planned entry points, Chief Stone began cutting through the hull in a pattern that made no apparent sense. She was creating openings in areas that were not marked on any schematic, and that tactical analysis had deemed unsuitable for infiltration. "What is she doing?" Tervok asked, his compound eyes tracking the human's movements with confusion. "Those sections of the ship should be filled with machinery or storage areas." Petty Officer Adams was doing something even more incomprehensible. She had somehow squeezed herself into what appeared to be the ship's waste disposal system, crawling through pipes that were meant to carry liquid waste between different sections of the vessel. "That is impossible," Nixathera said, her gills fluttering with distress. "Those pipes are too narrow for humanoid passage and they contain toxic chemicals." Seaman Miller had entered the ship through what looked like a solid wall. The recording showed her cutting into a section that should have been part of the ship's structural framework, somehow creating a passage where none should have existed. "How are they navigating without sensors?" Calais asked, her crystalline form dimming with confusion. "They have no mapping data for the areas they are entering." The alien soldiers, following their carefully planned routes, encountered the expected resistance from pirate security systems and patrols. They moved through the ship with professional skill, avoiding detection and neutralizing threats according to established procedures. Meanwhile, the 3 humans were moving through the ship, like water flowing through cracks. They appeared in places that should have been inaccessible, traveled through spaces that should have been impassable, and somehow avoided all the security systems that the pirates had installed. Chief Stone emerged from what had appeared to be a solid bulkhead, stepping out of a passage she had apparently carved through the ship's secondary hull structure. Petty Officer Adams was moving through the vessel's ventilation system, but she was also somehow using the electrical conduits and water recycling network as transportation routes. Seaman Miller was navigating through sections of the ship that were supposed to be flooded with toxic gases from the engine systems. She should have been dead within minutes, but she continued moving toward the hostage location as if the atmospheric hazards did not exist. They are not following any known boarding procedures, Tervok observed, his voice showing genuine alarm. Their routes make no tactical sense. Within 37 minutes, all 3 humans had converged on the hostage location from directions that the pirates could never have anticipated or defended against. They had approached from above, below, and through what appeared to be a solid wall. The pirates guarding the hostages were caught completely off guard. They had been watching the expected approach routes and monitoring their security systems, but the humans had avoided all of these completely. The hostage rescue was executed with surgical precision. The guards were neutralized so quickly and quietly that the hostages initially thought they were hallucinating when the humans appeared, but the recording was not finished. As the humans were securing the hostages, they encountered an unexpected patrol of pirates who had been conducting routine checks in other parts of the ship. The logical response would have been to hide, avoid confrontation, and wait for the patrol to pass. Instead, the humans attacked immediately. They did not use their standard military weapons. Instead, they had somehow constructed improvised weapons from random components they had found during their infiltration of the ship. Chief Stone was carrying what appeared to be a weapon made from kitchen utensils and electrical wiring. Petty Officer Adams had turned a piece of the ship's plumbing into some kind of projectile launcher. Seaman Miller was using a combination of cleaning supplies and ship components that should not have been able to function as a weapon at all. How did they create functional weapons from random debris? Calais asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chatur, improvised weapons were not just functional, they were devastatingly effective. The pirate patrol was overwhelmed before they could raise an alarm or call for reinforcements. The entire operation was completed in under 2 hours. All hostages were recovered safely. All pirates were either captured or neutralized. The human team had suffered no casualties and had accomplished the mission using methods that defied every principle of military science. The recording ended, leaving the classroom in absolute silence. Commander Zixara looked at her students, all of whom appeared deeply disturbed by what they had witnessed. The mission was classified as a complete success, she said quietly. However, all 3 human personnel were subsequently banned from participating in boarding operations. Why? Nixithara asked, though her voice suggested she was afraid of the answer. Because their methods were classified as unpredictably hazardous to mission planning and impossible to coordinate with standard tactical doctrine, Zixara replied. The mission commander stated that he could not guarantee the safety of other team members when working with personnel who operated outside all recognized parameters. The students sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had seen. 3 separate incidents, 3 completely different tactical situations, and in each case, the humans had succeeded using methods that seemed to violate basic logic. There is one more recording, Commander Zixara said softly. The incident that led to the complete prohibition of human involvement in galactic military operations. None of the students spoke. They were no longer confident in their understanding of anything. The final holographic file appeared with security classifications that made the previous recordings look like training exercises. The label read simply, Battle of Kepler Station, Classified Maximum Threat Assessment. Commander Zixara paused. Before activating the recording, her ancient elven features showing something that might have been reluctance. This engagement occurred 2 months ago, she said quietly. It was the incident that led to the complete prohibition of human involvement in galactic military operations. What you are about to see has been viewed by fewer than 50 individuals across the entire galaxy. The tactical display showed Kepler Station, a massive research facility orbiting a distant star. The station was home to over 10,000 civilian researchers and their families, making it one of the largest non-military installations in known space. The station came under attack by an enemy force of unknown origin, Zixara explained. The attackers possessed technology equal to or superior to our own and appeared to have detailed intelligence about the station's defenses and layout. The enemy fleet that appeared on the display was enormous. Over 100 warships had emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, immediately establishing a blockade that made evacuation impossible. The attacking force was clearly professional, well-equipped, and determined to capture or destroy the station. The defending force was pitifully small by comparison. Station security included 200 elite soldiers from various species, Altarian Special Forces, Velthari Heavy Assault Troops, Krethak Tactical Specialists, and soldiers from a dozen other worlds. They were outnumbered 50-1. Among the defenders were 12 human Marines led by Gunnery Sergeant Ashley White. The tactical situation was hopeless from the beginning, Zixara continued. Standard military doctrine suggested immediate surrender to preserve civilian lives. The students watched as the enemy began their assault. The attacking ships opened fire with devastating weapons that tore through the station's outer defenses like they were made of paper. Enemy boarding craft launched in waves, carrying thousands of soldiers toward the station's docking bays. The defending forces took up positions throughout the station, preparing to make the attackers pay for every corridor and room. The alien. Soldiers fought with professional courage, using their superior training and equipment to slow the enemy advance. For 6 hours, the battle proceeded according to established patterns. The defenders gave ground slowly, making the attackers pay a heavy price for each section of the station they captured. Casualties mounted on both sides, but the outcome was never in doubt. Then Gunnery Sergeant White made an announcement that changed everything. "All non-human personnel, evacuate to the station's core sections immediately," her voice came through the recording. "Human Marines, initiate Protocol Omega." Commander Zixara paused the recording. "This is where the situation became incomprehensible," she said. "There was no Protocol Omega in any human military manual. It was not part of their training doctrine. Our intelligence services spent 3 months trying to understand what it meant." "What happened next?" Calais asked, her crystalline form pulsing with anxiety. Zixara resumed the recording. What the students saw defied every principle of military science they had ever learned. The 12 human Marines did not just abandon standard tactics. They abandoned the concept of survival entirely. Sergeant Kelly Davis sealed herself into a section of the station that had been compromised by enemy weapons. Instead of trying to repair the damage or evacuate, she manually redirected the station's entire power grid through the damaged conduits, creating an electromagnetic pulse that disabled half the enemy fleet. She did this while standing in the direct path of lethal radiation that should have killed her instantly. Corporal Patricia Moore and Private Jennifer Clark worked together to turn the station's artificial gravity generators into weapons. They created localized gravity wells that crushed enemy boarding craft and the sections of the station they were attached to. They accomplished this while standing in the areas that were being destroyed. "They are using the station itself as a weapon," Tervok said, his voice filled with horror. "They are destroying their own defensive positions." Private Nancy Baker found herself facing an entire company of enemy soldiers who had breached the AVE station's main laboratory. Instead of falling back or calling for reinforcements, she released every dangerous chemical and experimental substance in the facility, turning the laboratory into a lethal environment that killed the entire enemy force. She remained in the contaminated area to ensure none of the attackers escaped. The humans fought for 72 hours without rest, food, or medical attention. They used their own bodies as shields to protect critical station systems. They used their blood as lubricant when weapons overheated. They treated their lives not as something to preserve, but as resources to be spent to achieve victory. Private Carol Green held a critical junction alone against 300 enemy soldiers for 18 hours. When her weapons ran out of ammunition, she began using pieces of the station itself as projectiles. When those ran out, she used her own equipment. When that was gone, she attacked the enemy with her bare hands. "This is madness," Nixithera whispered, her aquatic features pale with shock. "They are committing suicide." But they were not just committing suicide. They were winning. The enemy forces, who had been conducting a professional military operation, found themselves fighting opponents who seemed to operate outside the normal rules of reality. The humans used tactics that required them to die to be effective, but somehow many of them survived anyway. Corporal Susan Price turned the station's waste management system into a delivery mechanism for improvised explosives. She crawled through sewage pipes carrying bombs made from cleaning supplies and electronic components, emerging in enemy-controlled areas to attack from directions that should have been impossible. The enemy began to retreat. Professional soldiers, who had faced death in 100 battles, found themselves terrified by opponents who seemed to welcome destruction. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Kepler Station still standing. All enemy forces had been repelled or destroyed. All 10,000 civilian personnel had been successfully evacuated to the core sections where they remained unharmed. Of the 12 human Marines, only Gunnery Sergeant White survived. She was found unconscious in a medical coma that lasted 6 months. The recording ended in absolute silence that stretched for several minutes. Commander Zixara finally spoke. The human species was banned from military operations not because they were ineffective, she said quietly. They were banned because they terrified us. She looked at her students, all of whom seemed shaken to their core. The Galactic Council realized that humans do not fight wars the way other species do. They do not calculate acceptable losses or develop strategies based on preservation of forces. They fight as if the concept of defeat does not exist. Kale's crystalline form had gone completely dark. "What are they?" she whispered. "They are what happens when evolution creates a species that simply refuses to die," Zixara replied. Every other intelligent species in the galaxy developed advanced technology and sophisticated tactics because they needed advantages to survive. Humans developed technology and tactics because they wanted to win. She moved to close the classified files. "The Council did not ban humans to protect them from us," she continued. "They banned them to protect us from them, and more importantly, to protect them from themselves." Tervok raised one of his 4 arms slowly. "Professor, these recordings show humans operating under our rules and restrictions. What would happen if they created their own military doctrine?" Commander Zixara was quiet for a long moment. "That," she said finally, "is the question that keeps the Galactic Council awake at night." She looked at her students one final time. "Your assignment is to write a tactical analysis of human combat capabilities, but remember what you have seen today. These recordings represent humans fighting while following rules created by other species. The Council's greatest fear is not what humans do when they follow our rules of war." The classroom remained silent as the implications settled over them. "The Council's greatest fear," Zixara concluded, "is what they might do if they made their own." As the students filed out in contemplative silence, none of them spoke. They had come to class expecting to learn about the weakness of a primitive species. Instead, they had discovered that the galaxy's newest members might be the most dangerous of all.